The White House issuing a veto threat ahead of today's Senate vote on legislation to crack down on sanctuary cities. Hi, everyone. I'm Gretchen Carlson, and this is The Real Story. That vote expected to get underway shortly, but Democrats are likely to block debate, essentially killing the bill. Our next guest, Senator Rand Paul, will be voting in just a few minutes. He's the author of a brand new book, Our Presidents and Their Prayers. The Republican senator also running for president, as you know. Senator Paul, how are you going to vote on the sanctuary city bill?
I'm for it. I don't think that cities should have the right to ignore federal law, particularly when the federal law is something that is the prerogative of the federal government, and that's immigration. It doesn't happen any other time in our system. For example, I live in Kentucky, and if someone is in Ohio in the jail for burglary, but they're wanted for murder in Kentucky, as soon as they get out of jail, we transfer them directly to jail in Kentucky. I don't understand why it wouldn't be the same for people wanted for crimes like in San Francisco.
Right.
And this young lady might still be alive if we had actually paid attention to this.
Of course, you're speaking about Kate Steinle and something now called Kate's Law that's attached to this piece of legislation. There's her photo right there. I want you to listen to Bill O'Reilly, who was on The Real Story yesterday. He says this whole vote is going to be a farce today. Listen to this.
Everyone in the Senate knew the Democrats were never going to vote on defunding sanctuary cities, or Planned Parenthood, for that matter. And it's a fraud. And that's why the American people despise the Congress of the United States. We all know it's a ruse. And unfortunately, something very worthy, like Kate's Law, was attached to the defunding of the sanctuary cities, which I support, by the way. Let's see who opposes Kate's Law. Let's see who wants convicted aggravated felons to come back after being deported and not punished in a mandatory way.
So is it a ruse today?
No, I think he's confused on the issue. We often take up bills that we may not have the votes for, but that's how you have what's called a division of the House. We see how people vote on either side, and in the next election, that vote may well be very important as to who gets elected or not elected. But just because you think you might lose is not an argument for not having a vote. The other thing is that this does put pressure on Democrats in vulnerable seats to make a decision, because I think the idea of sanctuary cities is very unpopular, and we should put them on the spot.
And I don't know actually who would vote against this, because basically what the law says is that if you have illegally re-entered this country at least twice before, that this would put a crackdown on that, as well as if you've been convicted of an aggravated felony or worse. It just doesn't seem to make sense. But let's see how the vote goes, Senator. I want to move on and get your thoughts on this. The FBI and Secret Service investigating reports that a teenager hacked into CIA Director John Brennan's personal email account, and Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, the unidentified hacker, now reportedly claiming Deputy Defense Secretary Robert Work will be next. So, Senator, would these hackers be more easily apprehended and potentially stopped with a more robust NSA program that you were against?
No, I don't think they're related at all. I'm all for a robust NSA program. I'm just not for indiscriminately collecting the records of all Americans. So I think they're separate issues, true, and unrelated. But I am for protecting our secrets. I am for trying to make sure, for example, I think the fact that Hillary Clinton kept potentially classified information on our own private server against her own rules and against the rules of the State Department is a very important breach. And so I am for protecting our secrets, and I think that's consistent with not wanting indiscriminate collection of bulk records.
Let's talk about foreign policy. Russian military commander admitting to the press that the real story behind Russia's incursion into Syria is to actually help Syria's President Assad, not help American-backed rebels. And this comes as you blasted Senator Rubio, another Republican presidential candidate, for calling for a no-fly zone in Syria. So why is he wrong?
Well, I think it would be very, very dangerous, and probably would possibly get us involved in World War III. Because currently Iraq and Syria have invited Russia into their airspace. So if someone like Senator Rubio wants to have a no-fly zone, he would have to then agree to shoot down Russian planes that are flying in that airspace already. It's a really, really naive and foolish notion, and we should be very wary of who we have as our commander-in-chief, because we don't want somebody who makes the mistake that Ronald Reagan and many other great leaders avoided, and that is getting into an unnecessary war with Russia.
Okay, I know you've said that there is a false media narrative going on about how you are doing in the polls. Not sure exactly what that is, but you should be happy with a new poll out today showing you ahead of Chris Christie, Ted Cruz, Carly Fiorina, and John Kasich. So what did you mean by the false narrative?
Well, we do appreciate this vote and this poll that shows an improving trend for us. But we also think that young people and independents are underrepresented in all of these polls. And we think we're doing better than anybody with the youth vote. We also think we're doing better than anybody with the independent vote. And I think if those were better represented in a way they will be represented in the election, I think you'd find it a much tighter race.
All right. Senator Rand Paul joining us right before the important vote on sanctuary cities. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks for having me.
From Capitol Hill to fighting on the campaign trail, Fox team coverage for you today. Ed Henry covering the Dems. Carl's got the GOP. Let's go first to Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron. So, Carl, former President George W. Bush weighed in on two of his brother's rivals today. This is not like him at all to really say anything negative. What's going on here?
Yeah, but he has been out there working for his brother. Former President George W. Bush did make it clear months ago that he'll do or not do whatever it is that Jeb thinks will help. The other night, at a private gathering in Colorado with Bush backers, the former president told people he doesn't like Cruz, according to Politico, and talked about Rubio, too. Now, Cruz has been very critical of Republican leaders, including Chief Justice John Roberts, who was a Bush appointee. He worked in the Bush administration, too, and in a statement said he's proud of that and has great respect for the former president, but that it's no surprise he's backing his brother and attacking candidates he thinks pose a threat. When it comes to Rubio, the former president said he's not sure being a young first-term senator qualifies you to be president, but in the next breath said, of course, if Rubio wins, I'll be right back here next year and saying it doesn't matter. Even though Trump and Carson are way ahead in the polls, and there's still a really big swath of the GOP that's convinced the nomination is still totally up for grabs. Eventually, maybe well into next spring, they think the outsiders are going to falter. Attack ads and the brighter lights when the election and the voting starts will mean an experienced, well-funded career politician is going to prevail. Not a lot of evidence of that at this point yet, Gretchen.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so what does it mean that on foreign policy, the front-running outsiders are at odds with the former president's policies?
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. Trump opposed the Iraq War. He says his illegal immigration policy could have prevented the 9/11 attacks, and goes even further when he talk about Carson. Carson argues that the war in Afghanistan was a mistake, and he would have threatened that the U.S. would become energy independent in 10 years and that would cause the Arab nations, moderate Arab nations, to hand over bin Laden, quote, on a silver platter in 2 weeks. So the two GOP frontrunners are definitely at odds with what has been GOP foreign policy orthodoxy for 15 years. GOP hawks used to criticize Rand Paul for being an isolationist and weak on national security. Trump and Carson are taking it to a whole new level, and they're leading the polls.
Very interesting. Carl, thank you. Turning now to the Dems. Hillary Clinton on an upswing after her performance at the Democratic presidential debate. Meantime, was Vice President Biden taking a few swipes at the frontrunner during a speech today? Ed Henry, live for us in Washington. So, Ed, Joe Biden certainly sounding like a candidate today.
Gretch, you're right, because he took multiple shots at Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, by suggesting, number one, that he has more clout as the vice president when he travels all around the world. Listen to this.
Because the Secretary of State, we've had two great Secretaries of State, but when I go, they know that I am speaking for the president. There is nothing missed between the lip and the cup, that whatever I say, the president is saying.
Then you had Martin O'Malley today on The View taking a swipe not just at Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, but also the over 70-year-old Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Socialist Senator. Listen to this.
If he were to get into this race, he'd certainly bring a lot of experience and that perspective, but I think his generation is already overly represented in our party in this field.
A little swipe from the 52-year-old Martin O'Malley about the ages of the others in the Democratic field. Interesting, he then took out his guitar and played that Taylor Swift song, you guessed it, Bad Blood.
He's pretty good at the guitar. Okay, so Jim Webb did not have much impact on the Democratic primaries, and he's dropping out today. But you say he could have a major impact in the general election. How so?
Yes. It's not about 2015, it's 2016. You said it exactly right, Gretch. Last week at the first Democratic debate, Jim Webb could not even be heard. Watch this.
To do it because of the way they treat their own people. And I would say this. I've been waiting for 10 minutes. I will say this.
You're over your time, though.
Well, you've let a lot of people go over their time. I would say this.
You agreed to these debate rules.
Today, he dropped out, saying that since he's more of a centrist Democrat, he's not fitting in the Democratic Party right now, but is leaving the door open to an independent bid next year. Remember, the media spent a lot of time saying if Donald Trump runs as an independent, it will hurt Republicans. If Jim Webb runs, he could take away votes from the Democratic nominee in a general in key states like Virginia, where he was elected.
Yep, thinking that exact same thing today, Ed. Good to see you. Thanks.